75 years is a long time in a small business with all the changes that can happen in competition and government regulation, and sometimes just fate can doom a small business as well. But so 75 years is a long time, unless you're talking about mountains or oceans. Hi, I'm Patrick J. O'Connor. I had the opportunity and the good fortune in the last year and a half to write the book called Meet Me at Ray's, which is the book that describes the events and experiences of customers and employees who have been coming to Ray's Place in Kent, Ohio for some 75 years now. Well, Ray's began in 1937 when Ray and Margie Salvatore decided to open a restaurant. Depression was winding down and the war in Europe was starting up, and it might seem like an odd time for someone to open up a restaurant, to want to become an entrepreneur given the economic times. But Ray Salvatore, being a son of Italian immigrants, decided to do what many immigrant children had done, and that is become an entrepreneur, become a small business owner, because they wanted to get their slice of the American dream. They owned Ray's for a few years into the mid-40s when the restaurant was purchased by the Flog brothers, Rocky and Andy Flog. But in some respects it was the whole Flog family that purchased Ray's, because just about everyone in the family worked at Ray's at one time or another, or had some kind of contact socially, personally, in a business fashion as well. And the Flogs did many things here at Ray's, including in 1946 establishing televisions in Ray's, which was a very novel idea at the time because there were very few televisions back in 1946. They set the televisions up, and one of the reasons was they wanted customers to be able to watch sporting events, including a story I received from a retired math professor from Kent State who told the story of watching the 1948 World Series at Ray's on those televisions. And I had a photograph of Rocky and Andy with the televisions. It got me to wondering if that was really one of the first sports bars in the United States. The Flog brothers and their family ran Ray's very successfully for many years into the mid-70s, and at that point sold it off to another group of owners who came in and did some other novel ideas here at Ray's. Buddy and Mary LaCicero and Tom Shaw came up with a few new beverages, one notably the Futhermucker, which is still a popular beverage here at Ray's Place. Also a sandwich called a Mofo, which recently was declared a classic sandwich by Iron Chef Michael Simon on his Food Network television show. They also came up with an idea to put a band bar in the upstairs of the building at Ray's where bands would perform. There's been a lot of good music that has come out of Kent for many, many years, including here at Ray's. They then sold the restaurant to Charlie Thomas in the late 70s, and he's owned it ever since, some 34 years now. And he has continued the traditions of the previous owners by being out in front of the tavern restaurant business in a college town and thinking of ways to keep customers coming in and keep them happy and keep them coming back. Well, if you've come to Ray's more than once, you've probably noticed that there's a lot of the same employees here. Managers, and servers, and wait staff, kitchen staff, even some of the door people you'll recognize. Ray's has employees that have been working here, for some of them for 33 years, which is quite an accomplishment in a small business. They're a unique group of employees that kind of have their own way of doing things. They like, for example, to give nicknames to each other, like Shaggy, Deuce, Papa Cool is another one that they gave. They have customer nicknames, Put-in Bay Johnny, Rockin' Robin. And one of the things that I've enjoyed in getting to know some of them over the years is the interest that they take in the customers and how they do get to know the customers. I think that's a pretty unusual kind of thing for employees to do, but that's the kind of thing that's very common with the employees here at Ray's Place. We had about 200 stories submitted for this book called Meet Me at Ray's. The most senior story, if you will, that I received of the 200 submissions was from someone who came here in 1943. And it's quite an interesting story by an Army veteran, Joe Shercliffe, who lives down in Suffield, Ohio. As an 18-year-old, he was standing out in front of Ray's to catch the train to head to Fort Hays, Columbus, for the Army training depot to be shipped off to Germany to fight World War II. As he stood in line in a hot August afternoon, he thought to himself that he was thirsty and there may not be too many more opportunities for a cold beer in the United States. So he walked across the street to Ray's and had himself a cold beer and vowed that when he would return, he would come back to Ray's. And fortunately, 3 years later, Joe did return to Ray's and still comes to Ray's from time to time and has featured this story in our book about Ray's Place. Joe's been a customer at Ray's now for some 70 years, which is quite an accomplishment, and everyone's thrilled to see Joe when they get a chance to see him. You might imagine in 75 years of business that a lot of people will come through a restaurant like Ray's, and over the years many notable people have. A lot of athletes, and especially in the 50s and 60s, Ray's was a very well-traveled establishment for professional bowlers, golfers, football players. The music has been a big part of the city of Kent State University for a long time, so there have been a lot of very popular and famous musicians who have come out of this area and were customers at Ray's, including people like Joe Walsh and Mark Mothersbaugh and many, many others. A rather notable person who's been at Ray's on a number of occasions and pops in here whenever he's back in town is the entertainer Drew Carey. Drew attended Kent State University back in the 70s and loved coming to Ray's and will still stop in Ray's from time to time. In fact, he was here the night that Kent State men's basketball team played an NCAA basketball game, which has been about the most successful run Kent State's men's basketball team has had in the NCAA when they made it to the Elite Eight group of teams, and Drew Carey came here to Kent that night. Drew is a regular at Kent and regular at Ray's whenever he's in town. What is it about this particular place, about this space, if you will, that brings such loyalty and affection for people? And so many, many people feel like this is their place. They come to Ray's, it's their place. For a lot of people, Ray's is very much like the phrase alma mater, which is a Latin phrase that translates to nourishing mother. And many of us think about our college days as a place where a lot of very special events and relationships have occurred, and many of those have shaped our entire lives. The town and the university sort of become intertwined together, and I think that's a part of the attraction and affection for Ray's, is that it reminds people so much of their time, and they can go back home again, which is, we hear the phrase, you can't go home again. Well, you can go home again. You can go home as often as you like at Ray's Place. Charlie Thomas, the owner of Ray's, and I have spent a lot of time together as we've worked on this book, and I've enjoyed learning from him how he makes Ray's the place that it is. And in part of the time that we've talked, we've tried to get at this, what is it that makes Ray's such a special place? Ray's is like a well-worn shoe, is the way he describes it. And I think all of us have that favorite pair of shoes that we like to use, that are comfortable to us, that are reliable, and that we just flat out just like them.